December 1944. The Third Reich was bleeding. On the Eastern Front, the Red Army surged relentlessly toward Berlin. In the west, the Allies had broken through Normandy and marched across France, reaching Germany's frontier. Most in the world believed that Hitler's Reich was living its final months. But inside Germany, behind the walls of command bunkers and in the mind of Adolf Hitler himself, a desperate plan was forming. A gamble, a final throw of the dice, one last chance to reverse the course of history. This gamble would become known as Unternehmen Wacht am Rhein, Operation Watch on the Rhine. But history remembers it by another name, the Battle of the Bulge. The situation in late 1944. For the German people, the year 1944 had been catastrophic. The Allies had landed in Normandy in June. Paris had been liberated by August, and the Wehrmacht had been pushed back to its own borders. German cities lay in ruins under constant Allied bombing. Food was scarce, oil scarcer still. On the front lines, German soldiers were exhausted. Many were barely more than boys, others men, recalled from factories or convalescent hospitals. Yet still they fought on with grim determination. It was in this dark context that Hitler conceived his most audacious plan since the start of the war: to strike back not defensively but offensively, with the scale and ambition of 1940. The target, the Ardennes, that thickly forested region on the border of Belgium and Luxembourg. It was the same ground through which German panzers had smashed France 4 years earlier. The aim, to punch through the thinly stretched American lines, drive westward, and seize the port of Antwerp. By doing so, Hitler hoped to split the British and American armies, cut off their supplies, and perhaps even force a negotiated peace on the Western Front. Inside Hitler's headquarters. In the autumn of 1944, as Germany retreated on all fronts, Hitler summoned his generals. His voice, still commanding, rang with a kind of delusional conviction. He declared that Germany could not merely defend. The Reich must strike a blow so shocking, so powerful, that it would stun the Allies and restore Germany's lost initiative. Many generals doubted the plan. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt and others argued that Germany simply lacked the men, tanks, and fuel for such an operation. They urged a more limited attack. But Hitler was unmoved. For him, this was not merely military strategy, it was destiny. The Führer saw in the Ardennes Offensive the chance to repeat his early triumphs, to rekindle the Blitzkrieg, and to prove to the German people that victory was still possible. The soldier's perspective.
For the men in the ranks, the whispers of a coming offensive were strange, even unreal. Many had been retreating for months. To suddenly be told that they would launch a great counterattack seemed almost impossible. In villages and forests along Germany's western border, divisions gathered in secrecy. Soldiers cleaned rifles, checked their tanks, and prepared for battle. They had been ordered to maintain strict silence, forbidden even to light fires at night. In the forests of the Eifel and the Ardennes, whole armies waited. Over 200,000 men, nearly 1,000 tanks and assault guns, and thousands of artillery pieces. Hidden under the cover of dense woods and winter fog, they assembled like a coiled spring. Among them were veterans of countless battles, men of the Waffen-SS, panzer divisions, and Volksgrenadier units. Some still believed in Hitler's vision, others fought simply because they had no choice. But all of them knew this attack would decide everything. December 16, 1944. The offensive begins. At dawn on December 16th, the silence of the Ardennes was shattered. Over 1,600 German artillery guns unleashed their fury across a 130-kilometer front. Shells rained down on unsuspecting American positions. Fog clung to the forests, muffling sound and masking movement. For many German soldiers, it felt like the old days of blitzkrieg, the thunder of guns, the sudden lunge into enemy lines, the promise of victory. The American forces holding the Ardennes were thin, scattered, and largely inexperienced. Many believed the sector was quiet, a rest area for tired divisions. Instead, they were struck by the full weight of Hitler's last great offensive. The German mindset in the early hours. As panzers rumbled forward and infantry advanced through the snowy woods, morale among German troops surged. For the first time in months, they were not retreating, they were advancing. Letters and diaries from the front reveal their hopes that this attack might split the Allies, that perhaps it could even end the war. Some dreamed of marching into Antwerp, others of returning home victorious. But behind that optimism was a darker truth. Many officers knew that fuel supplies were dangerously low, ammunition was limited, and every man realized that failure would be catastrophic. Still, in those first hours, the German perspective was of renewed purpose. For them, the Ardennes Offensive was not only a military operation, it was redemption, a final chance to prove themselves on the battlefield.
Civilians and the home front. Back in Germany, news of the offensive was greeted with jubilation. Goebbels' propaganda machine declared it a stunning success. Newspapers claimed that the Allies were in retreat, that the spirit of blitzkrieg had returned. Ordinary Germans, wary from bombing raids and shortages, clung to these reports. For them, the Ardennes offensive seemed like a miracle, a sign that the war might still be won. Yet behind the headlines, there was fear. Families who had already lost fathers and sons knew what another massive offensive meant: more sacrifice, more blood, and perhaps nothing gained. The Germans push forward. As the first days unfolded, German units smashed through the American front lines. Entire companies were overrun, towns captured, and thousands of prisoners taken. For soldiers on the ground, the experience was both exhilarating and harrowing. Roads jammed with tanks, trucks, and horse-drawn wagons. Villages burned. Snow turned black with soot. The cries of the wounded filled the frozen air. The offensive was not just a test of arms, but of endurance. German troops marched long hours through deep snow, often without proper winter clothing. Food was scarce, and fuel scarcer. Yet the dream of victory pushed them on. By the end of the first days, a massive wedge had been driven into the American lines. The Allies were reeling, the Germans advancing. It seemed, for a fleeting moment, that Hitler's gamble might succeed. But for those who lived through it, the offensive was not only a military operation. It was a crucible of hope and desperation, a battle where the fate of Germany and of Europe itself hung in the balance. For the German soldier in December 1945, the Ardennes was not just another battlefield. It was the last chance, the final hope, the gamble of a dying Reich. Through the Ardennes. The first hours of the Ardennes Offensive had gone as planned. Surprise had been total. American units, scattered and unprepared, reeled under the German assault. For the first time in months, the German army was on the offensive. Across the snowy hills and dense forests of the Ardennes, columns of men and machines pressed forward. Panzers ground over icy roads, horse-drawn artillery creaked through narrow valleys, and infantry trudged silently, rifles slung, eyes fixed on the horizon. To the men of the Wehrmacht and Waffen-SS, it seemed that destiny had returned to their side. But the reality of the Ardennes was far harsher than the propaganda promised. Breakthroughs in the snow. In the opening days, the German advance cut deeply into the American lines. Towns like Clairvaux, Saint-Vith, and Malmedy fell under heavy assault. German commanders urged their men onward. Speed was essential. For the plan to succeed, Antwerp had to be reached quickly, before the Allies could react. Every day of delay was fatal. Soldiers recalled the chaos of the American retreat, abandoned vehicles, stacks of supplies, and prisoners taken in the thousands. It felt, for a brief moment, like the early days of Blitzkrieg. Veterans remembered 1940, the rush through France, the collapse of their enemies. Could history repeat itself? But unlike 1940, Germany in 1944 was exhausted. Behind the illusion of momentum lay shortages, fatigue, and the weight of 4 years of total war. Kampfgruppe Peiper, the spearhead of the offensive. At the center of the assault was Kampfgruppe Peiper, a battle group of the 1st SS Panzer Division Leibstandart Adolf Hitler, commanded by SS Standartenführer Joachim Peiper. To German soldiers, Peiper represented ruthless determination. His unit spearheaded the drive westward, pushing through American lines with tanks, half-tracks, and armored infantry. Their orders: reach the Meuse River as fast as possible, and seize the bridges intact. But the roads were narrow, the terrain brutal. American engineers blew bridges and blocked passes, slowing the German advance. Fuel shortages forced Peiper's men to capture Allied fuel dumps just to keep their tanks moving. For the German soldiers in Peiper's column, the pressure was immense. Every kilometer forward cost time, fuel, and lives. And the deeper they drove, the more resistance they encountered.
The cold reality of war. For ordinary German infantrymen, life during the offensive was harsh beyond words. They marched for hours through snow and freezing winds, often without proper winter uniforms. Their boots leaked, frostbitten feet bled, and rations dwindled. Sleep was a luxury. Soldiers huddled in barns, cellars, or open fields, wrapping themselves in blankets taken from civilians. Food often came from the very villages they marched through. Bread seized from Belgian farmers, livestock slaughtered on the spot. Yet despite hunger and exhaustion, many still clung to hope. Letters captured after the battle reveal German soldiers writing home with cautious optimism. The offensive is going well. We are advancing. Perhaps this will bring us victory. For them, the Ardennes was more than another battle. It was a chance to prove that Germany could still fight, still resist, still command fear. Malmedy and the brutality of war. But the Ardennes was also a place of brutality. As Kampfgruppe Pieper advanced, they encountered stiffening American resistance near the town of Malmedy. It was here, on December 17th, that Pieper's men became infamous. After capturing over 80 American prisoners, members of his unit massacred them in a field, gunned down in the snow. To the Germans, such actions were brutal realities of war. To the Allies, they were atrocities that hardened resolve. From that moment on, Kampfgruppe Pieper was hunted relentlessly. For ordinary German soldiers, news of the massacre spread quickly. Some saw it as proof of ruthless determination. Others felt unease. But in Hitler's Reich, doubt was never spoken aloud. Orders were followed, always. The first signs of resistance. By the third and fourth days of the offensive, cracks began to appear. The American retreat slowed. Units regrouped and held strongpoints in towns and road junctions. At Bastogne, the 101st Airborne Division dug in. To the Germans, Bastogne was just another town, but its position at the crossroads of 7 roads made it a vital prize. Capturing it would open the way to the Meuse. German soldiers hurled themselves at Bastogne, fighting through freezing days and nights. But the Americans refused to yield. For every German advance, another roadblock rose. For every breakthrough, another counterattack came. The sense of unstoppable momentum began to falter. Fuel, the lifeblood of the offensive. Every German soldier in the Ardennes knew that fuel was life. Tanks could not move without it. Trucks could not resupply without it. The entire offensive depended on capturing American fuel depots. Many German units carried only enough fuel for a few days of combat. Tank crews were ordered to conserve every liter. Abandoned Allied trucks were stripped of gasoline. Barrels rolled onto German vehicles. Still, shortages mounted. Soldiers recalled the frustration of seeing powerful Tiger tanks left behind, abandoned in ditches because they had run dry. For the men, it was a bitter irony. They had the machines of war, but not the fuel to drive them.
The German soldiers' thoughts. As days turned to a week, the mood among German troops shifted. In the first days, hope had burned bright. Victories seemed possible. Prisoners marched eastward in long columns. But now questions spread in whispers. Why had Antwerp not yet been reached? Why was Bastogne still in American hands? Why was the fog lifting, allowing Allied planes to strike again? For many, the optimism of December 16th was fading. They still advanced, still fought, still obeyed orders. But deep down, some began to fear the truth, that this gamble might fail. The view from the high command. In Hitler's headquarters, early reports painted a picture of triumph. Goebbels broadcast that the Allies were collapsing, but the generals knew better. Sepp Dietrich, commanding the 6th Panzer Army, complained bitterly about delays. Rundstedt warned that the offensive was slowing. Model urged Hitler to authorize withdrawals to save men and equipment. But Hitler refused. He demanded perseverance, declaring that victory was close at hand. For him, doubt was treason.
The soldiers on the front lines carried the weight of that stubbornness. They fought in snow and fire, with dwindling supplies, believing they carried the fate of Germany on their shoulders. By late December, the bulge in the Allied lines was real. On the maps in German headquarters, it looked like success. A massive wedge carved into Belgium, enemy units scattered. But on the ground, the truth was harsher. Every kilometer gained came at terrible cost. Supply lines stretched thin, fuel depots empty, and American resistance hardened with every passing day. For the German soldier, the first week of the Ardennes Offensive was a march of hope and hardship. They advanced through snow and blood, convinced that they might still change the war. But already the signs of failure were beginning to appear. The question was no longer whether they could strike deep into Belgium, but whether they could survive long enough to reach their goal.
Battle of the Bulge, from the German perspective. In the first days of the Ardennes Offensive, German soldiers had believed in the impossible. They had broken through the American lines, advanced deep into Belgium, and carved a great bulge into the enemy front. But by Christmas of 1944, the glow of victory began to fade. The offensive, which had begun with such fire, was slowing. The Wehrmacht, starved of fuel, overwhelmed by supply shortages, and confronted by stiffening American resistance, was beginning to realize the truth. The gamble was failing. The Siege of Bastogne. At the very center of the Ardennes stood the town of Bastogne. For German commanders, Bastogne was a critical objective. Its roads connected much of the Ardennes. Without it, the German advance toward the Meuse River would be crippled. And so German forces surrounded the town, hammering it day and night. Tanks prowled the edges, artillery pounded its streets, infantry launched repeated assaults. Inside Bastogne, 101st Airborne Division, along with elements of other units, held out stubbornly. American paratroopers dug into frozen foxholes, refusing to yield. To German soldiers, the resistance seemed uncanny. They were used to enemies collapsing under the weight of blitzkrieg. Yet here in Bastogne, the Americans refused to break. On December 22nd, German envoys delivered an ultimatum: surrender or be annihilated. The answer from General Anthony McAuliffe was short, almost mocking. One word: nuts. When that message spread among German soldiers, some laughed at the absurdity. Others grew grim. They knew what it meant. Bastogne would not fall easily. The fog lifts. For days, German soldiers had relied on dense winter fog to hide them from Allied planes. The sky had been their ally, shielding their movements. But on December 23rd, the weather changed. The skies cleared. Suddenly, the roar of Allied aircraft filled the air. Waves of American bombers and fighters struck German columns. Tanks burned on the roads. Trucks exploded in flames, and marching infantry were cut down in fields of snow. To the German soldier, the shift was devastating. They had no answer to Allied air superiority. Every movement by day risked destruction from the sky. The fog, their cloak, had lifted.
The fuel crisis deepened. By Christmas, the fuel situation had become desperate. German panzer units often advanced only a few kilometers before running dry.
Tank crews siphoned fuel from abandoned vehicles, stripped American trucks, and rolled barrels by hand. But it was never enough. Some panzer commanders were forced to leave their machines behind, powerful tigers and panthers abandoned in ditches or hidden in barns. For German soldiers, it was heartbreaking. Their best weapons stood useless, silent, for lack of fuel. Infantrymen muttered bitter jokes. We marched to Antwerp on our feet, not on our tanks. For many it was clear, without fuel the offensive could not succeed. Christmas at the front. December 25, 1945. Christmas in the Ardennes. For German soldiers, it was a bitter holiday. In the villages they occupied, some managed to find food, even a bottle of wine or schnapps. Others huddled in frozen foxholes, gnawing on bread as shells whistled overhead. Some thought of families back home, of wives and children under Allied bombing raids, of Christmases before the war. Many wondered if they would ever see another holiday. Yet propaganda officers insisted the offensive was a triumph. Radio broadcasts spoke of enemy collapse, of victory near at hand. Soldiers at the front listened, shaking their heads. They knew better. The Americans' counterattack. While German troops struggled forward, the Allies were regrouping. General George S. Patton, commanding the U.S. Third Army, executed a daring maneuver, turning his entire army north to relieve Bastogne. On December 26, Patton's tanks smashed through German lines and reached the town. Bastogne had been saved. For the German soldiers surrounding Bastogne, the effect was crushing. They had fought, bled, and frozen to capture the crossroads, only to see the enemy not only hold but be reinforced. What had once seemed like momentum now felt like stalemate. The soldiers' realization. Letters and diaries from German troops during these days reveal the shift in mood. We have advanced, but not far enough. The enemy is too strong. We are running out of fuel. The Americans do not run. They fight like devils. We thought they were weak, but they are not. I fear we are being sent to our deaths for nothing. For the ordinary lancer, the German infantryman, the Ardennes was no longer a campaign of hope. It was survival.
In Hitler's headquarters, reality was unwelcome. Generals like Rundstedt and Model urged caution. They reported that fuel shortages and Allied counterattacks threatened the offensive. But Hitler refused to accept failure. He demanded that Antwerp must be taken, that his armies must push forward. He dismissed Bastogne as a mere dot on the map. To German officers, it was madness. Yet orders were orders. And so the men in the field bore the burden of Hitler's refusal to face the truth. The human cost. For German soldiers, the Ardennes became a nightmare. The snow was stained with blood. The forests echoed with gunfire, artillery, and the screams of the wounded. Roads were clogged with destroyed vehicles, frozen bodies, and the detritus of war. Medical units were overwhelmed. Many wounded froze to death before they could be treated. Supplies of bandages and medicine ran out. And still the fighting continued. Every village, every crossroad,
every forest trail became a battlefield. By the end of December, the Ardennes Offensive was faltering. The great dream of reaching Antwerp was gone. Bastogne held firm. American reinforcements poured in. And yet Hitler demanded that the offensive continue. For the German soldier, it was now clear. This was no longer a march to victory. It was a struggle to avoid annihilation. The Ardennes had begun with hope. But by the final days of December, that hope was slipping away. What had been a gamble was turning into a catastrophe. And the German soldier, caught in the snow and fire, began to wonder, was this truly the final battle?